cheat codes for adding the jazz vibe to modern styles of music, like Yussef Dayes, Alfa Mist, Thundercat, Flying Lotus, all those dudes. You need a Rhodes. The Rhodes was there for the birth of electronic music, and it has remained. It's consistently at the heart of sonic rigs. If you want to tap into the 2024 jazz vibe, you're going to need a specific kind of Rhodes, not the glittery, phasey disco ball Rhodes that dominates a lot of the keyboard libraries out there. You need a warm, smoky, velvety Rhodes. You can get this sound by removing a lot of the highs and slathering on reverb, but the truth is, you really get this sound by playing the Rhodes with a light touch, which is harder to come by. But it's how I played when creating my electric piano sample instrument called All Rhodes, which is compatible with all DAWs and operating systems, including iOS. It dwells entirely in the vibed out spectrum of the instrument's sonic possibilities. You can get a copy on my website, jaronlopez.com. The link's below. I'm going to go with the Grand Rhodes preset, called Grand because the lowest notes are panned all the way to the left, and the highest notes are panned all the way to the right, with every note in between gradually panning from one side to the other. This simulates the way an acoustic piano sounds when you're sitting at the bench, and brings a really nice stereo image to the otherwise mono instrument. Check it out. We've got our Rhodes, but what do we play? To get the jazz vibe, we're going to need some jazz chords, but immediately we have to deal with a paradox. Jazz harmony is super colorful and can be very moody and noir-esque. That's what we want from the jazz realm, the smoky, foggy qualities. But the way that jazz heads typically use these chords has little to no chill. That's where the beat-based, electronic-infused, house-flavored styles come in. We want to take the understated side of beat music and pair it with the vivid harmonies of jazz. Have them meet right there in the middle. So how do we do this? We'll need a chord. It's hard to get this vibey quality with a major chord, so we'll stick with minor. A lot of the color of jazz harmony comes from the sheer amount of notes, so we'll need more than 3 and less than 7. If you want a complete explanation of these concepts, check out my Chords That Vibe playlist, which has a ton of videos explaining these things in hyper detail. We'll start on E and stack up to the 11th. 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11. Now we've got E minor 11, a 6-note chord that has a nice watercolor texture to it. Now this is where a lot of people go wrong. They say,
where does the music theory tell me to go next?
Instead, you should say to music theory, thanks for the lift, I'm going to take it from here. We can move this chord wherever we want. We can move this E chord 1 semitone away, 2 semitones away, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 semitones away. And that's actually all of the options, because there's 12 notes in total. We're starting on one of them, so there's 11 possible places that we could move this chord. Don't stress about what key we're in or anything like that. We started with an E minor chord, so we're in E minor. And now we're just going to teleport somewhere else. Let's go with 8 semitones away to C minor. Why? It just feels right to me. But we could make any of the 11 possibilities work equally well. Think of these as 2 harmonic territories that we're moving between. No need to justify it beyond that. As they are now, it sounds like the chords just teleport from E minor 11 up 8 semitones to C minor 11 because the whole chord structure is shifting uniformly. How can we get this same harmonic motion but hide the fact that we're teleporting as much as possible? We can find ways to reposition the notes of the chords that obscure the motion. We're not going to add notes, take away notes, or change the notes. We're simply going to reposition the notes by moving them either up or down an octave. The E minor 11 chord is nice and cozy where it is, but the C minor 11 chord is kind of high and bright. Let's move that one down an octave. This is better, but the motion is still very obvious. The ear tracks the top notes of chords and latches onto that as the perceived melody. So right now, whether we like it or not, the melodic fingerprint of this chord progression is the top note of E minor 11, A, moving down to the top note of C minor 11, F. This combined with the root motion is what's killing the vibe. But check this out. There's this note, chillin' here, one semitone above the top note of C minor 11, F. This note is F sharp. It's the ninth of E minor 11. How can we get this note to be the perceived melody instead of A? We can just move A down an octave. This doesn't change the identity, flavor, or color of the chord at all. It's still E minor 11. In fact, it's even tastier now because now these three notes live right next to one another, which makes the chord more dense. Now this melodic motion from F sharp to F natural is the melodic fingerprint of the chord progression. It's smooth and distracts us from the teleporting that's going on between E minor 11 and C minor 11. We can do one more thing to erase any evidence of this teleportation. We can take the root note of E minor 11, E, and lower it by one octave. Now between the two chords, the top note and the bottom note move in opposite directions. This is called contrary motion, and it forces the ear's attention on the individuality of the notes, rather than the harmonic chunks. Now we've got ourselves a jazz vibe. If you feel overwhelmed by this, good news. I put together a MIDI pack where I've done all of this for you, for every minor chord in all 12 keys, teleporting to all 11 possible root movements. It's called Chords That Vibe Volume 1, and every chord progression is already optimized in its smoothest possible position. There's 132 chord progressions in total, and they're ready to be turned into tunes. If you already know the ins and outs of harmony, this is a great inspiration resource, and it'll definitely show you a lot of new tricks. And if you're new to this kind of harmony, this will save you years of learning, Googling, and YouTube watching. I wish I had a pack like this when I was trying to figure this stuff out. Now that we have the chords in their smoothest form, we've already done more than half the work, because at this point, we can simply scoot the beginnings and endings of the chords forward and backward to create groove. This is essentially syncopation, and it's a good idea to reflect these rhythms in the drum pattern, especially in the kick. Let's shift the second chord so that it happens an eighth note earlier. And now for the real power of what getting these blocks to move smoothly allows you to do. We can take a musical highlighter and draw a line through these blocks. Again, not adding, changing, or removing any notes, but instead just making certain notes more bold by repeating them in their current position. You can do this so many different ways, but this is what my ear pulled me towards. Rising up to the top three notes of the E minor 11 chord, all on eighth note offbeats, and then linking up with the top note for the chord change, F sharp to F, which is that melodic fingerprint that we carefully crafted when we were optimizing our chord voicings. Then, at the end of the second chord, I repeat the second note from the top, D, which then leaps up to the top note of the first chord, F sharp. D is common to both chords. Common tones are very useful when weaving lines through chord blocks. One thing you want to be careful of when using this technique is not letting the chords create a seasickness kind of feeling when you're rocking between these two harmonic zones. To avoid this, we'll duplicate the clip so that we have room to create a variation. The second time through the idea, we'll arrive at this D earlier, and where the D was initially, we'll instead go up to G. And you might be thinking,
I thought we weren't allowed to add, remove, or change any notes.
Well, check this out. This G note is in the chord. It's just for this single quarter note, we're moving it up one octave, which then smoothly moves down by one semitone to the top note of the first chord, F sharp. You can see the game here. The more adventurous the chord movement, the more important it is to articulate that chord movement in the smoothest possible way. If we want to kick this idea up a notch, we can use a type of chord that creates what I call harmonic gravity. These are dominant chords. There's way too much involved with dominant chords to go all the way in this video, but here are the essentials to get your wheels turning. What defines a dominant chord is that it's built on the fifth of the chord you want to be pulled towards. Since our idea starts with an E minor chord, the fifth would be B, so we need a B chord. But a dominant chord needs two more things. It needs a major third, which would be D sharp, and it also needs a flat seventh, also known as a minor seventh, which would be A. From here, you can add a ton of other notes, and this is what makes the dominant chord so versatile and harmonically powerful. Now that we have a dominant chord, our chord progression has harmonic gravity that pulls back to the E minor chord that begins the loop. This is what my MIDI pack Chords That Vibe Volume 2 is all about, adding dominant chords to the types of chord progressions found in Volume 1, giving you 132 more chord progressions, all of which have this harmonic gravity built into them. Between Chords That Vibe Volume 1 and 2, you get 264 chord progressions that could yield tons of tunes in all vibes and styles, from hip-hop to house to drum and bass and beyond. I honestly probably shouldn't be releasing these into the wild, but I am. Now that we've got our dominant chord, we can do more scooting and nudging, we can highlight a melody line like we did with the first chord progression, and we'll wind up with a second section. What about bass? Good news. We can create a bass line using the exact same highlighter method we used with the chords, except in this case we're only going to let one note play at a time. Copy your chord clip to your bass track and deactivate or mute every note except the bottom note, which is the root note of each chord. I am going to use a bass preset called Nod from my Electronic preset pack for Ableton's analog synthesizer. Your melody is hiding in plain sight. It's within your chords. Duplicate your chords to a lead track and deactivate or mute notes so that only a single thread remains through the blocks. I'm going to focus on the notes we repeated when making the Rhodes track. What makes something melodic more than anything else is breath. The voice is the original melody maker, and the voice is limited by breath. If you want your synths or instruments to feel more melodic or vocal, make sure there are gaps in between some of the notes. These will be perceived as breath points. And for my lead sound, I'll be using a preset called Turquoise from my Electronic preset pack for Ableton's analog synthesizer. You can give your track a whole different vibe just by changing the lead sound. Let's try an alto saxophone. How about guitar? comments which one you liked best, the synth flute, the alto sax, or the guitar. And there you have it. Now you know how to start injecting the jazz vibe into your tracks. And if you want to bring this Rhodes sound into your project, you can grab a copy of All Rhodes, my electric piano instrument for all DAWs and operating systems. If you want 263 more chord progressions like this one, you'll find them in the Chords That Vibe Volume 1 and Volume 2 MIDI packs. And if MIDI's not your cup of tea, I have a sample pack called Samples That Vibe Volume 2 All Rhodes, which features this Rhodes instrument and 30 of my favorite chord progressions from the MIDI pack in classic audio sample format. You'll find all of these individually and offered at a savings in bundle packages on my website, jaronlopez.com. I also offer co-producer and session musician services as well as private lessons over Zoom, all of which you can book on my website. And if you want to join a community where we get into vibed out stuff like this, join the Patreon. You'll find everything linked below. Until next time, farewell.